event. I hope that it will be most helpful to you. I'm going to start with just a few minutes of brief introductions, and then we will get right into our discussion with our panelists as they answer our questions regarding how to prepare your strongest law school application. We received dozens upon dozens of questions from our attendees, so we may not get to all of them during our brief time together, but I hope that we can cover many of the topics. I will leave room at the end of this program for students to ask any unanswered pressing questions, and will also invite students to contact me directly after the event to continue to work on answering your questions. During our time together, we are going to focus specifically on improving the strength of your applications. So if you're an individual still deciding about whether or not you would like to pursue law school, or perhaps you've made the decision to apply, but you need some guidance on where do you even start, or would like to know more generally what is legal practice like, what are the benefits of attending law school, we aren't going to spend too much time answering those questions here, but please do not hesitate to contact me for guidance and resources on those topics. I would like for you to remain on the call, as I know what will be shared here will be relevant, helpful, and interesting as you try to come to a decision about your next steps. Just briefly, before we get into the questions, I'd like to introduce myself and our panelists. I am Maysa Nichter. I am the director of the Law and Politics Initiative at UCSD. It's an initiative originating in the political science department at UCSD, but for the benefits of all students and alums. So you do not have to be a political science major to take on the benefits of this initiative. The intent of the initiative is to inspire and support students applying to law school, policy school, and other related fields. If you're interested, you can read my bio and contact info on the initiatives page on the political science website. More importantly, for now, I just want you to attach a name, Maysa Nichter, and a program, the Law and Politics Initiative, to supporting your law-related goals, and to know that we have programming throughout the year. You will receive the emails as we develop the programs and opportunities, but please also don't ever hesitate to contact me directly as well as you come up with questions to reach your goals. Moving on to our panels today, we have the following members on our call. I will briefly introduce them, and if they could just wave and say hello so our students know who they are, that would be great. First, we have Dean Edward Tom, who was the UC Berkeley School of Law Dean of Admissions from 1987 to just recently when he retired in 2017. He has decades of experience reviewing thousands of student applications and making difficult decisions about which students to admit to one of the country's top law schools. I'm a graduate of this law school, so I am honored to have you here today, Dean Tom, to inspire and guide our next generation of applicants.
Go Bears.
Yes. Next, we have Director Erin Van Dorn, who is a dear friend and also the Director of Admissions at USC's Gould School of Law. Erin, if you could just wave.
Right on.
We also have with us today Director Danae McElroy, who is the Director of Admissions at UCLA School of Law. We also have Dean Justin Cruz, also a friend, who is the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Diversity Initiatives at Chapman University's Fowler School of Law.
Hello, everyone.
We also have Dean Jorge Garcia, who is the Assistant Dean of Admissions, Diversity, and Financial Aid at the University of San Diego School of Law. And last but certainly not least, I've also brought on a very knowledgeable individual with a slightly different perspective, Mr. Hamad Zawahi, who is a close friend and founder and CEO of Right Track Admissions, an organization devoted to helping students gain admissions to the top graduate schools in the country, including law. And he comes to us today with over a decade of experience doing just that. And Hamad, yes, there you go, Hamad. So now on to our questions. Again, focusing this hour on gathering tips from our experts on how to prepare your strongest application. Most law schools consider the following documents and requirements: undergraduate GPA, LSAT score, personal statement, resume, letters of recommendation, as well as any additional addendum. and in some cases, a statement pertaining to an applicant's commitment to diversity. My first question to the panelists, I'd like to know from our experts, and to the extent you're able to share, as you gather around your team this cycle or in the recent past, what has been your priority to focus on in putting together your next class of students? How are the different pieces of the application weighed in importance? Any volunteers?
I'll jump in.
Thank you, Dean Tom.
Oh, it's difficult because law schools receive a lot of applications every year. And applicants often try to distill the entire process down to LSAT and GPA and what I say in the personal statement. But people have to understand that within any given applicant pool, there are going to be tens, hundreds of people with the same LSAT score, with the same GPA. And so I think to the extent that we're all interested in finding a diverse, interesting group of people, applicants need to focus on what sets themselves apart from everybody else, what kind of voice they will bring into the classroom. And I think if you come from that perspective, rather than fixating on just the two numbers, and look at it in a more holistic review, it might help you a little bit, assuage your anxiety.
Great. Anyone else, any thoughts? Okay, so moving on to our numbers, which I consider the objective pieces of the application, namely the GPA and the LSAT. I know we received a bunch of questions about these numbers. Let's talk GPA. Is there an ideal GPA? And what do you say to the student who perhaps had a bumpy start in their undergrad years, perhaps has a GPA under 3.0, perhaps they switched majors at one point because they're not doing so well in their initial major? How does GPA affect them, and what can they do to present themselves in the best light if they feel that their GPA is not representative of their abilities to succeed in law school? And let me direct that question to Erin, if you could respond to GPA.
Sure. So the GPA is it's a fun part of the application. And the reason I say this is because it's one of the pieces of the application that really spans time. So we can see growth, we can see opportunity and challenges overcome by a student. We often see candidates who switch schools, switch majors. For those of you who don't know, you'll submit all of your transcripts to LSAC, and they will compile what's called a CAS report for us, the Credential Assembly Service. That will create a banner page. And what that banner page does is it sort of conveys all this information to us in a very concise way. And what I really appreciate about this information is that it shows us each institution, each year, your GPA and sort of what that trend looks like. It really helps us to see where there might have been challenges in your education, or what might have happened with your academics if you switched institutions, or if you took a break from your schooling for a reason or studied abroad. And then we can look to your transcripts and actually go through, line by line, the classes that you took and where you struggled. I was reading files this morning, and I was doing just this, right? If I see there's a semester or a year that has a much lower GPA, I'm going to go there and find out why. Often it's because candidates started with a STEM or an engineering major, and then they decided, oh, this isn't really for me. Now I'm going to focus on something that I have more interest in. And I see some smiling faces in the crowd, so I imagine that's probably a story that may affect a few of you. We are very used to seeing that. Most of us have questions in our applications, or we welcome addenda to your application where you can actually tell us what happened in that situation, whether you struggled, with your academics, or you had some family concerns, or maybe you had some medical issues. So you can address those directly in the application for us. One of the mistakes I think candidates sometimes make is they don't do that. They think, oh, well, if I don't address it, they won't notice it. Well, we've all been doing this for a very long time. So I will tell you that we will notice it, and we will wonder what happened. And I think, one of the themes of the many you'll probably hear from this conversation is don't leave anything up to our interpretation, right? If there's a story behind something that happened that you want to share or you want to give context to, that story should come from you. So be sure to address that. You can just do it, sort of very quickly or easily by saying, this is what happened, this is how I overcame it, this is what I learned, and move on. And we'll spend about that much time worrying about that as well. One of the other questions we get in terms of GPA is, can my graduate degree help me if I choose to do a graduate degree prior to going to law school? We're very happy to see graduate work, but it's not a requirement. So it's not going to impact your cumulative undergraduate GPA that's reported, but it does help to address academic maturity. So if you have some questions about that, I'm sure the rest of the panel would be happy to give some more insight on that.
Great, thank you so much. We just want to continue to move along because we do have a lot to cover. Moving quickly right to LSATs, we had some questions about, is it better to take the LSAT or the GRE, since recently GREs can now also be submitted in replacement of the LSAT. Not all schools allow that, but I think USC is one of the schools that allows that. So if, and if there are any other schools on the panel, if you could speak briefly about if there is a preference for the LSAT or the GRE.
Do any other schools on the panel accept it? I think Berkeley does, right? UCLA. Danae, do you want to address GRE? Just since I just did a lot of talking.
Sure. So there are a handful of schools that are accepting both the LSAT and the GRE. We don't, give more weight to one over the other. We accept them both sort of equally. However, I will say still that the vast majority of our students are taking the LSAT, but there are a handful of students in the class with a GRE score. I think that it is probably still advisable for most students to take the LSAT, simply because that's going to be much more widely usable for you in your law school application process. There is a subset of students, though, for whom the GRE makes more sense. And I think that is students who have either already taken the GRE and did well because they were considering attending a different type of school. So, for example, sometimes we'll see students who were applying for a graduate degree in engineering or in social work. They get a GRE score and then something happens and they realize, actually, I think I'd rather go to law school. And so it's nice for them to be able to have that flexibility to use the GRE score to not have to worry about taking the LSAT. I think it's also a helpful score for students who are really interested in pursuing a joint degree program, because there are a number of joint degrees that do have a requirement for the GRE. So those are the two areas where I'm seeing it be most helpful for students. But ultimately, you do want to be strategic, and if you feel like you're going to do much better on the GRE, then maybe that's something that you end up taking instead of the LSAT, but then you just have to realize that your options might be a little bit more limited in terms of where you're able to apply.
Thank you.
And Maysa, if I could just add two quick things about the GRE. So the two pieces, or the one piece of advice that I give to GRE only candidates, is to apply as early in the process as possible. And the reason for that is because all of us that accept the GRE, all of us law schools that are ABA accredited are only allowed to seat up to 10% of our class without an LSAT score. That's just an ABA requirement. And so if you think about that, depending on our class sizes, so for USC, we're about 185 students, that only leaves 18 seats in our class that are allowed to come in without an LSAT score. We specifically also have a 3+3 program, which allows candidates to come in from undergrad without an LSAT score. So that's going to further limit the number of GRE candidates that we can admit. So the reality is for most of us, we can only admit a certain number of GRE candidates until our deposit deadline passes, because we can't have more than 10% of our class come in without a GRE score. So that's just to give a little bit of context about why it is probably a little bit more important for GRE candidates to ensure that they apply as early in the application process to their law schools as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the resume, and Dean Garcia, if you could respond to the resume piece. What should be included in an applicant's resume, and how far back should it go?
So yeah, the resume can be one of those tiebreaker documents, right? When everything else looks very similar, as Dean Tom alluded to. There's some that I would strongly recommend that the candidate reach out to the individual schools to which they're applying, because there are some schools that are very firm about, it's a one-page document and that's, make it fit. There are some of us who are a little more lenient and will allow it to go into a second page. Clearly employment history is important. I wouldn't go back to any jobs prior to undergrad. High school jobs shouldn't be included. If space is an issue, then maybe remove any job that maybe you did for a couple of months during the summer, just to open up space. You also want to, clearly add any the educational history. So if you have clearly a bachelor's, or if you went to grad school, that should be included. I would recommend that you add any type of special recognition, like maybe you're on the dean's list, or you got a very selective scholarship. That can also be included. And then briefly, any type of extracurriculars that you were involved in, whether it be student organizations or volunteer work. Things that you shouldn't enter, don't put a picture on the document. Don't put an objective. We can understand that you're applying to law school, and that's the point of this. But again, follow directions. There are some schools that are very strict about how to structure and how it should be, framed. Stay away from, crazy fonts, colorful paper. It's professional school, and you want to maintain, professionalism in this document.
And I know a lot of students, as they're progressing in their undergraduate years, they stress about picking the right major. If you could respond to that as well, Dean Garcia, it doesn't matter what major a student chooses to study. Should they take on a minor, and specifically, should they take on a minor if it may sacrifice some work experience?
You're right. We do not look for specific majors. I mean, from personal experience, we've admitted classically trained musicians to electrical engineers, and the general path is a lot of poli-sci, criminal justice, sociology, English. That's very common, but we're not going to limit it to those. When you do study in an area that maybe does not require extensive reading and writing, then we may be a little more careful as we pick through the transcripts to make sure that the person is able to write and has been challenged in some of those areas that are that correlate with success in law school. To your question about whether should somebody pick a minor over a job, I mean that's really a personal decision. There are some students that work because they have to work, and I would not be one to say sacrifice yourself financially to add a minor. I think that if there is an interest in that minor, and the person's going to benefit from it, then sure. Is it going to all of a sudden add another level to the actual application, the admissions application? It's not going to do that. I think that people should do it because it makes them happy. The same thing applies to, should I go get an internship at a law firm? If it makes you happy and that's what you want to do, then go ahead and do it. If you want to stay and work at Starbucks and that makes you happy, do it. We have found that when you are doing something you really want to do, you're more likely to do it well. And walking away with a letter of recommendation from a place where they have seen your potential is much more valuable than forcing yourself to do something that your heart's not into.
Thank you. And this question is for you, Dean Cruz. We have a number of alums that are on the call, and some are anxious because they may be out of their undergrad years for 3, 4, 5 years. How do you suggest they put themselves in the best light? First of all, is it common? Do you see students who have taken a number of years off or a gap year? What can you say to assure them that this may or may not be common, and how to present themselves during those years where they're away from school to come in as a strong law school applicant?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I speak to this question from personal experience myself, because upon graduating from undergrad, I actually worked for about 5 years before I applied to law school. So I can definitely share some insight to what helped me be successful as an applicant. But I would definitely first and foremost just assure everyone that that's actually more common than you think. It's the number of students that are working for 1 to 3 to 5 years before coming to law school is a good portion of applicants, right? I mean, some students do come right from undergrad, but others do take a few years to work. I think at Chapman, it's close to a 50-50 split. It may, deviate 5% in either direction, depending on the year. But we have a lot of folks that, work for a few years and then decide that they want to come to law school. I think some of the things that obviously, someone who has worked a few years is going to be helpful is in some of the application components in particular, right? Resume is one, right? Where you can highlight your work experience, right? And talk about, maybe the jobs or the work that you've done since graduating, right? And, in that on that resume, you should have, whatever position that is, and have some bullet points in there talking about things that you've done there, and use verbs, use things like organize, supervise, manage, so we can see those transferable skills that are going to be, transferable to coming to law school, right? And you're going to have a little bit more maybe than someone that's coming right from undergrad because of that, a little bit more, maybe even management or supervisor experience, or even, more things that you did within that position. So your resume, I mean, we usually encourage students to try to keep your resume between 1 to 2 pages, but your resume may be a little bit going into those 2 pages because you have more experience to talk about. I think one of the things that students struggle with coming back to law school after working is getting letters of recommendation. And there's kind of 2 ways that you can do this. One is, you can actually work, if you already, if let's say you're in school now, but you're going to work and then come back, is you can actually get your letter of recommendation and then have it stored on the LSAC website. You can bank your letters of recommendation. And that's something that, usually if it's just, a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, and it's been stored, those are still relevant to us. Those are still helpful for us to see, especially if they're academic letters of recommendation and they're talking about your, experience in the classroom, right? But another way to do it, and this is the way I had to do it actually, was, I had graduated for a few years, but I didn't essentially, have, any letters of recommendation banked. So what I did was I actually reached out to professors that I did well in, that I felt that I had, had some type of communication relationship with, that I visited in their office hours. I asked questions and sent them an email and said, hey, can I meet with you and actually sit down and discuss, my interest in law school? And would you mind writing me a strong letter of recommendation? And I found that they were very receptive to that. And I even sent them my personal statement, my resume, a short statement of why I was going to law school and what my interests were, so that way they knew more about me and they could write a strong letter of recommendation for me. And that worked really well. I definitely encourage you to have a phone call. Now obviously you have Zoom, so set up a Zoom meeting. In the past, I did mine in person, but that was, different times. But that's definitely a way to kind of get those academic letters of recommendation. Because here's the thing, right? I mean, obviously, if you work and you have work experience, you could definitely get, professional letters of recommendation from a supervisor. And I think that, if you have 2 or 3 that you are submitting, a balanced effort, one from a professor, one from a supervisor, is great if you've had significant work experience, which most people who have been out a few years and working will have that. But it's always important to at least have 1 letter of recommendation from a professor, sometimes even 2. Because law school is a very academic program, academic in nature, right? We want to see that you're able to perform within the classroom and that you can, you can compete in a classroom and that you can reach out to professors and meet with them. So, I would always encourage you to have at least 1 to 2 letters of recommendation from professors, and then definitely get 1 from your supervisor or someone you work with. When I applied to law school, I remember I worked as an engineer prior to law school, and I had 1 from the engineering manager in my department who was very supportive of me going to law school and wrote a wonderful letter of recommendation. So I submitted that as one of mine because, hey, this is an engineering manager who's been with the company for 20 years, and he's seen my work, he's seen my transferable skills, and he spoke to them. So that's what's important there. And then I think lastly is just, outside of the application, itself, I think it's, definitely kind of getting things in order, right? There's some, sense of, and this is from personal experience, of like, anxiety to a certain extent of being like, I'm working, I'm getting paid, and all of a sudden I'm going to stop working and, not have a job and just be essentially, going to school, right? And there's anxiety in there, right? And thinking about, you're not working, so you're not getting paid, so you don't have like an income coming in, to just being a full-time student. Like, you have a routine when you work, and, you have most of the time your evenings off, where in law school, yeah, it's not quite going to be like that all the time. I mean, you have to definitely balance it. But, those were things that, I was, kind of thinking about going in, but I can tell you that, there's a bright side to that, and that most students who have worked a few years before going to law school go in and have a razor sharp focus, right? Because if you've already had a career and like, hey, that was a great career, I really enjoyed it, but really this is my goal, this is my passion, this is my ambition, then you're more focused. And I tend to see that a lot of students that work for a few years come with a different level of focus. They treat law school like a job. They get up early, they go to school, they study before a class, they go to class, they may study after or between classes, and then they come home, they have dinner, and they kind of treat it like a job, right? Like you normally have a job. So that's where it can actually be a benefit to students that have, worked a little bit to be able, to really kind of just step in to law school and treat it like a job. Because even for those of you who aren't coming right from undergrad, that's a good way to kind of look at it as well, is that, treat law school like it's work, like it's a job, like you're going in 9 to 5, 9 to 6, or whatever it takes for you, to be successful, and treat it like that. And I think that's where it can be helpful. But for those of you who are out there who have a few years of work experience, power on, you can do this. The only last thing I'll touch upon before I finish is just, I think one of the things too is just kind of changing your mindset, right? I mean, usually when you're working, you may be in some positions learning and doing work in a sense that, it's an easier transition to law school, but it's going to be a transition, right? You're going to be reading a lot. You're going to be back in the academic classroom. So what I encourage students to do that are coming from work and going back into academia is, definitely take advantage of any resources that potential law schools are offering, whether it's, through orientation, through summer programs, through anything that can help you kind of start getting back in the rhythm of being a student again. Because once law school starts, it's just kind of, you got to hit the ground running and keep moving. So it's important to try to ease back into that. Maybe over the summer before you start law school, read more books, get in the habit of reading, maybe read some books about law school, not required, but just to kind of help your mindset get back into it. So that's all I have to say, but definitely, for those of you out there, keep powering through. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Cruz. And so if you have any more questions about your resume, what should be included, what you should focus on, feel free to direct your questions my way, and I'm happy to help you with that. Moving on to the personal statement, and I want to direct this question to Hamad Azwahi. Our students are really interested to learn more about this document, and I think it's because they realize the potential strength it can have to tip them from a no to a yes, or a maybe to a yes. And certainly top schools in the country, as Dean Tom alluded to, receive thousands of applications with identical GPAs and LSATs. In your experience, how can students differentiate themselves in the personal statement? And perhaps even more mysterious, how does a student who doesn't apply with the strongest GPA or LSAT sometimes gain admission to these top law schools?
Thanks a lot for having me, Maysa. And I have to say, this is a very trippy situation, because I had a very, very poor LSAT score. And the gentleman on this call, Mr. Ed Tom right there, Dean Ed Tom, is the one who looked at my personal statement and granted me admission into Berkeley almost 20 years ago. And because
of my life.
And because of him, I swear to God, I thought to myself, I said, given this opportunity, I'm never going to squander it. And it was such a privilege to go to Berkeley. And I did everything I could while I was a student because of this incredible honor. Largely due, I have to say, to the application I put together. And it really opened up my eyes to the opportunities that can really come about of things that are in your hands. There's going to be a lot of students here who are sweating bullets about the LSAT, may not have the best GPA. Maysa alluded to that question at the beginning, and we also talked about the LSAT / the GRE. But there is an opportunity of something that is in your hands. Now, while the story itself may have already been written because you're an alum and you are applying, let's say, in this admission cycle. But if you're not applying in this admission cycle and you're applying, let's say, next year or in 2 years out, you really want to be thinking about the totality of your story and building towards that story. The way that we say it at Right Track is really living your story. So you want to create a series of experiences, or be very mindful of experiences, challenges you've faced, tribulations you've gone through, things that have happened in your life, and mark it down, write it down, think about it, and put it down on a paper that's constantly building and working. It's a dynamic document. And when it comes to the time of writing your personal statement, which typically for me, because I knew I took the LSAT in December, I didn't do well. I took it again in June, I didn't do well. And I realized that the only shot I had was banking on a strong GPA and really my personal statement. So I started writing it sometime around June, July, and then submitted it to actually Berkeley, I think was one of the first schools I applied to, which I want to say was October. But whatever happens, make sure to get that out before Thanksgiving. And the idea is you're building that story. It's not something that will happen overnight. It's not a personal statement that will develop, in the 11th hour. It's something you want to build, revise, look at, think about, and really map out. And it has to have an element of continuity. You don't want to just say, you know, I was doing, you know, let's say engineering, and now I want to do law, and not create the nexus between the two. You want to create the nexus. It has to be about a story, because stories are memorable. Stories will allow you to really stand out. And I can speak a little bit more about the anatomy of a personal statement, of exactly what you should be thinking about when you finally put this all together. Do you want me to do that, Maysa, or is that?
Yes, please do. Just a minute or two to give the students some guidance. And of course, they can always come to me or to you if they need more assistance with this. But what is the basic anatomy of a personal statement? And if you could just focus on how to make themselves really unique compared to other students that they may not know by just reading literature that they've read before.
Perfect. Okay. So really, really quickly, and obviously I defer to the deans who have read more personal statements than I can imagine and would know a lot about this. But from my experience, what I've seen, there's this formula that makes for a really strong personal statement. You want to start with something that really kind of grabs their attention. It doesn't have to be a quote, because sometimes that's cliche, especially if it's nothing that you've said or somebody very close to you. And it's your classic, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, Gandhi kind of stuff. You want to think more about it from something that's personal to you. It could be an action or something, but think about your life like a movie. What is going to be the opening scene of your life? And if we're the audience looking at your life, what's going to grab us, or what's going to turn us around and watch us walk out of the movie theater? So grab their attention for the beginning, but already tease them from the beginning of where you're kind of going, provide a little basic roadmap of where you're going with this personal statement. You don't want to kind of put the punch or the hook only at the end, because they may tune out from the beginning if it doesn't really grab their attention. So you want to kind of preface it from the beginning, grab their attention and preface it from the start. The second paragraph or second section really should be about giving context. Like in a movie, it fades to black from the action sequence. It goes forward into where you are in terms of outlining your life story, where you are, the context. Okay, that's your, you know, your upbringing, maybe your academics and so forth. Justin referred to if you are been out of school, so you had some professional experience. So hold on to that professional experience, because that's going to be in section 3. But if you haven't, and really your only experience is really in academics, that's going to really be in section 3. But in section 2, it's your background, your context, your life. Then in section 3, either it's your academic and professional, or academic only if you only have had academic experience, or as I said, a melange of the two, a professional academic, in terms of background, what you've been doing. And then say, look, here's what I've been doing. Here's what I really believe in. Here's what I've tried to do, but I can't get to this point where I can really make that impact unless I go to law school. So paragraph 4 is really going to be about that transition, that kind of flux about why you want to go to law school. But sometimes you have to like nail it on its head too explicitly, but you want to basically tease out, what is the transition? Why does all this make sense for you to go to law? And then the 5th paragraph, if it's necessary or not. For example, UC Berkeley now has, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dean Tom, it has a why Berkeley essay, which is in addition to your personal statement. Also, Berkeley is one of the few schools that gives you up to 4 pages to write, while most law schools, you want to keep it to 2. So section 5, if you don't have the opportunity like UC Berkeley gives you or UCI gives you, you want to write why that school. And why that school really comes down to the professors, the clinics, the programs, the classes, the community, the location, this class size. You know, we talked, the dean at USC Gould Law School said 185 students, small class. Berkeley, I think, was about 200 to 300, I want to say. Some schools, I think Harvard's in the 500 to 600 range. So it depends where you are better, you know, where you're better suited, where you have a better learning environment. That's in paragraph 5. Paragraph 6 is the conclusion. It brings it back full circle. The brain likes to think and close the loop. So it goes right back to the beginning and kind of brings closure to whatever you started the action sequence from. And what's crazy is, again, I'll quickly finish with this, is when I wrote my personal statement in 2000, I want to say 3, I talked about doing something that I actually ended up doing 10 years later, which was, it was almost like, it was incredible that my life journey just ended up going to that direction. And even now, when I read the personal statement almost 20 years later, it still gives me goosebumps. That's how important it is. That's how strong this thing should be. It should not be half-assed. You really got to put everything into it, because that's going to be your anchor statement. And then there's going to be other statements, which hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about, which is the diversity statement for UC Berkeley, the why UC Berkeley statement, and you have your addendum, which the dean from USC talked about, and then you have your resume, which we've already talked about as well.
Thank you. That was super helpful. Thank you, Hamada. For all our panelists, if you could raise your hand, in every cycle, do you typically admit students who do not meet the median GPA LSAT who have a strong personal statement? I think all hands went up for the most part. So, and also I would like to ask the panelists if you could volunteer just a tip about what not to do on a personal statement, something, it can be humorous or it can be something that you actually see quite often that is just not effective. If you can think of something that students do, so we can avoid this cycle with our students. I'll start with Danae, if you have one, if you could mention something.
If you are applying to UCLA and you're writing your personal statement, at the end, you probably shouldn't write. And that's why I really want to go to USC Gould School of Law.
Thank you. Let's see. Justin, do you have something that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. And I agree. I mean, you know, it's funny that Danae mentions that, because we laugh about it all the time, but every year I get at least a dozen so applications that have the wrong school. So definitely do that. I think the other thing is use your own words. I'm not a big fan of using quotes from anybody, from Thoreau, I mean, they're great quotes, and I love quotes in myself. I love, you know, prophetic things that other people say, but this is an opportunity really for you to use your voice and for you to use your words. So try to avoid using quotes at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, you know, really use your words. And in the same vein, you know, talk about yourself, right? Some personal statements tell a story about a family member, and they spend the whole personal statement talking about the family member. And at the end, I want to admit their family member to law school, right? Because they spoke so greatly about them. Now, there is a difference. Like if, you know, you had a family member, you know, maybe who got sick, passed away, or that you helped out, and that was kind of an inspiration because of a story related to them. And you talk about, you know, how, and shortly what happened, and then you talk about how that inspiration helped you apply for law school. That's okay. But just talking about them and just saying, now I want to go to law school, it's not as strong. So those are the two things I would say to stay away from.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dean Garcia, do you have anything that you see that is just not effective?
You know, every year we see this trend of like, we'll get a batch of personal statements that start very similar. You know, I don't know whether people go to like discussion groups like Reddit and they see it and they use it, and we'll have this batch of like applications that look so similar that, you know, right away you're just tuned out, to Amada's point. You know, as Dean Cruz mentioned, be original. You know, don't go and try to get ideas from the web, because there's a good chance that you're not going to be the only one that uses that idea, and then the whole thing is shot. You know, that you can recover from a bad start. So you know, again, it's your story. You know, people always ask us, how do I set myself apart? And that's not the whole point of this exercise. You know, we're trying to find out who you are. Yeah, you know, make sure that you structure it well, but don't try to. There's a fine line between being creative and just going crazy. So, you know, just it's professional school. I would follow Mada's guideline. I think that was really good advice.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dean, Tom, do you have anything from your years of experience?
Yeah, I do. I think applicants need to understand what law school is all about and what law school is like. It's not like undergraduate school, where you sit there and take notes and you memorize things and you regurgitate. Law school is about analyzing problems. It's a 3-year-long conversation, if you will, with your fellow students and with your professors. And so at the admissions end, we're very interested in finding out what kind of voice you're going to be able to lend to the classroom conversation. And your voice is a function of what you've done in your life, the distance you've come, not just the problems and obstacles you've encountered, but what you've done with them and how they've changed your life. And when I was reading applications, I've been retired a couple of years now, every day Saturday, by the way. But when I was reading applications, I always liked to read the personal statement first. Mm. And that was because I was looking for someone I wanted to have a beer with or have a coffee with afterwards. And that was a function of not just good writing, because I really appreciated good writing. But it also had to do with the kind of voice that I was hearing, the kind of potential for wisdom. Of course, we're all looking for smart people, but we're looking for potentially wise people in the end. And so the personal statement is your beginning point for that. It's probably the hardest part of the application because look, after all, GPA is kind of water under the bridge by now. You're going to take the LSAT, but those two numeric factors do not measure your heart. They don't measure your heart. And that's really important in the profession. It's important in law school. And the only way that we as admissions people get a handle on that, in addition to your personality, is through that personal statement. So in answer to Maysa's original question, don't come at us with trying to be Jerry Seinfeld. Don't try to come with us with poetry or movie scripts or videotapes of your apartment. I had one application one year in which the applicant talked about seeing me in the local coffee shop every morning and how much they wanted to tap me on the shoulder and say, I really want to go to Berkeley Law. And then the next paragraph was about how they used to see me at lunchtime and they would know where I wanted to go for get a sandwich. And you like those tuna melts over there, don't you? And I have no idea how badly I want to come up to you and tap you on the shoulder and tell you how badly I want to get into the law school. And sometimes I see you late at night going into your car. You have that black car, don't you? Don't follow your admissions people around. It's scary. That's a big mistake.
Thank you so much. I love those words of wisdom, differentiating between smart and wise. Of course, law schools are looking for smart, but on top of that, to the extent that they can see, gain individuals that seem to have some wisdom, some life experiences, all the better. And that is the soul of law and law school. Moving on to letters of recommendation, we did get some guidance from Dean Cruz about letters of recommendation. Specifically though, if students are grappling between how they should comprise their letters of recommendation, do any schools prefer or have a preference over employers, over professors? What should the, I guess, the letters of recommendation be comprised of? What would be the strongest set, if there is one?
I can start with this. I mean, some schools will absolutely tell you that they want an academic letter regardless, but a lot of schools won't. What I want to encourage you to remember is that first and foremost, you're applying to an academic institution. So it is important for us to be able to gauge your skill set in things like research, writing, analyzation, right? The skills that are going to be necessary to be successful in the classroom and in the community. So I strongly encourage candidates to have an academic letter if they are within a few years of an academic institution, even if it's not required. For those of you who are considering taking time to get work and life experience, you can consider banking that letter or multiple letters before you graduate or contemporaneously with graduation. We are very happy to see academic letters that are a year or two old, or maybe even up to 3, because it was written contemporaneously with your education. It also makes it a lot easier to go back to an academic professor and ask them to update a letter that they've already written. So I would strongly encourage you to consider that. Now, if you do have life and work experience, I think we would absolutely expect to see something professional in nature, especially if you've taken some time between academics and applying to law school. We want to hear about what skills you've been growing, what type of experience you've had, what kind of character you've been building during that time. I think it's really healthy to have probably one of each for schools that require 2, though we will not, I don't think we would hold it against you. I wouldn't hold it against you if you only submitted academic letters, but definitely look forward to receiving both types.
Thank you, Erin. I also have a follow-up question to that. Is there anything that students can do or provide to their letter writers to help them write a strong letter? Because I think oftentimes, especially in your undergrad years at large institutions, you barely know your professor. So what can you do to make the letter more personalized and more genuine to the applicant?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dean Cruz mentioned this in his own personal story, but I think, first of all, you want to build a relationship, right? You don't just want to walk into someone's office and ask for something. So hopefully you've built a relationship, even a mentorship with those that you ask to write your letters. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you have a copy of statement, if you have a copy of your resume, that you walk in and have a conversation with your professor or your employer. If it's your employer, right, making sure that you sort of have a conversation about what it is you're hoping to accomplish, perhaps what the theme or the content of your application might surround. If there's anything that you aren't planning to include in your application, then you may also want to indicate that to your letter writers, so that we don't get through your application and then read your letters of recommendation in the end and find out something totally new and different about you that is nowhere else in your application. And that does happen. Not usually a bad thing. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to ask the person that you're asking to write the letter of recommendation, ask them if they can write you a letter of recommendation, and if it's a positive letter of recommendation. I can't tell you how many times a year I read letters of recommendation that are either pretty apathetic or actually say negative things about someone. Sometimes I print those and save those for examples down the road. But asking that question gives your recommender the opportunity to opt out, either because they don't feel like they can give you a positive letter, they may not know you well enough, or they may be too busy. Because that's the other challenge. LSAC will not complete your application without your required numbers of letters of recommendation. So if your recommenders don't submit their letters, your application sits in that in that incomplete zone because they can't submit your CAS report. So I always encourage you to give false deadlines to your recommenders. And I would also ask them in the off season, right? So if you're going to have an academic letter of recommendation, you might want to consider requesting that from your professors in the summer or even in the spring before the application cycle, and making sure that they have plenty of time to get that, that letter in and banked with LSAC.
Sorry about that, I was muted. The last document that we're going to talk about briefly before we get into open questions is the diversity statement. Not all students require a diversity statement, but for the schools that do, I think this is a document that can be a mystery to some applicants. What is the diversity statement? What should they focus on? And also, what if this applicant feels as if they're not diverse? Who is comfortable speaking on that? How can they approach that statement?
If I can answer that. So think about the personal statement is really a testament to why you want to go to law school based on your life experiences and your life goals. The diversity statement is really asking you, how are you going to add value to the class? Which, as you can imagine, now more than ever is mission critical. And what you have to also note is diversity is not just the color of your skin or what you believe in, but it's also medical tribulations, life achievements. It's how you supported a family member. It's things that you've been through and all the context to really create tolerance and empathy in the person you are and how you can add that to the classroom. As Dean Ed so wisely said, and this is 100%, is that we need more wise people that can really add to the profession. So you're not just looking at making money and just going through life, focused on yourself and maybe your nuclear family, but I mean, look at the elections. I mean, if anything is shown is how important it is to be together. Look at COVID, same kind of thing. So the diversity statement really allows you to kind of pull back the curtain to kind of show who you are in terms of your own upbringing and background and how that will add, your life experience and how that will add to the class dynamic in terms of the discussions or the community or how you would contribute to a journal, the discourse and so forth. So that's really the distinguishing feature of a diversity statement. And what you want to make sure that you don't do is you don't want to write a personal statement and then a slight tweak and call that your diversity statement. It really needs to be two distinguished documents that together really form who you are, because in the end of the day, don't forget, you do not have an opportunity to be interviewed by the school, unlike an MBA program. So this is your opportunity to really give the admissions committee, to the deans on this call, all the material they need to better understand who you are from the perspective of your career goals and how your life has shaped that, to the perspective of your own background, lifestyle, tribulations, and so forth, and how that's made you hopefully a more tolerant, empathetic, and a richer person in mind and spirit.
Can I add a little something to that?
Please.
That was a great explication, Hamada. Another way of looking at it is maybe you ought to consider your local admissions deans not as deans of admission, but as choir masters, and how every year we have to build a different choir, a brand new choir. And the only difference is in a regular choir, you want basses and tenors and altos and sopranos. Well, we want 200 or 300 distinct voices in our choirs. And your diversity statement is a chance for you to articulate what kind of voice you will lend to that choir. And, you know, the range of experiences, be they be coming from an ethnic or cultural background to growing up in a impoverished family or whatever they may be, sexual orientation, age, work experience, these are all diversity factors, and they can be leveraged to your advantage if you do it the right way. And the right way is to begin with the knowledge that we all want a very diverse kind of crew to come in every year to populate our classes.
Thank you, Dean Tom. Okay, now I have one last question before we open it up to our students who've been listening so patiently on this call. We've had a number of questions about the competitiveness of this cycle. How competitive has it been so far at your institution? And generally, are November and January LSATs too late? Should they wait an additional year, take a gap year, if they are an individual who is taking the LSAT just now or in January? So let's go school by school. Dean Garcia, if you could speak to your institution.
Sure. So nationally, applications are up about 35% this cycle so far. Now, we don't know whether that's going to maintain or whether it'll taper off at the end, but you know, the figures indicate that it's going to be slightly more competitive. With regard to you know, sitting out a year, I don't think that's necessarily true just yet. I mean, you know, there's an exam that's going to come up this month, and I believe it's next week. Whereas 2 years ago, there used to be only 4 LSAT exams held annually. Now they're closer to 9. It's like, it seems like every 6 or 7 weeks, there's one being held. The next one after the November exam is January, and for many programs, that's still considered within the window of time where you can apply and still meet the either firm deadline or a preferred deadline. So, you know, if that's possible, I would still, you know, encourage people to apply this year. If somebody's just starting to, you know, familiarize themselves with the process and, you know, they don't know what the LSAT is, then yeah, possibly, you know, begin to plan to apply for the following cycle. Now, there's some programs in the country that admit mid-year. They admit in the spring. You know, if that's of interest to you, then maybe, you know, research that a bit. But I don't think that it is too late just yet. I think that there's still, you know, we're right in the middle of the application window right now. Most deadlines are on the tail end of January or February.
Thank you. And Danae, do you sense the same thing where your applications have increased since the past cycle? And what advice would you give for an applicant who has yet to take the LSAT?
Yeah, so applications are up substantially nationally, as Jorge was saying, and also, you know, at UCLA in particular. And I do think this is going to be a very competitive year to seek admission, but I don't think that that should discourage anyone who is planning to apply this year. You know, if you have your ducks in a row, have some confidence in yourself and in your application, and go out there and get it done. And the worst that can happen is that, you know, maybe you don't get into your top choice schools, but that's okay. You know, you can always reapply next year. You can start at a different school and apply to transfer later. With respect to the LSAT, you know, I actually think that because it's such a competitive year, I think that we're going to be even more conservative than normal in terms of admitting, because we know there are so many applicants out there. You know, so to that end, there are going to be plenty of seats, as there usually are, still left in February when our deadline happens. So I think you're perfectly fine, at least at UCLA, to take the November or the January LSAT. And I don't think that you would be at a significant disadvantage compared to other applicants who applied earlier this year.
Thank you. And what about the situation where some applicants have all of their documents except for the LSAT ready to go? Would you suggest that they go ahead and submit everything they have and then wait for their LSAT score to come in and prepare an addendum to that effect? Or should they wait to apply until January when all their documents are in?
So I think you should generally apply as early as you can with the strongest application that you can. That said, if everything is together in the in the scenario that you just described, and all you're waiting for is that LSAT, go ahead and submit it. Right, get it out of your head. It will certainly make your life much easier. And then you can just indicate in your application that you have an additional LSAT score that's going to be added to your application. And if you need to submit an addendum, that's perfectly fine. All of our offices are well equipped to accept any additional information you might need to provide after the point of your application.
Okay, and just by a show of hands, do all the schools review the applications as they come in, or do they wait until all the components are in before looking at the application? Which schools wait until all components, including the LSAT, are in? Okay. All right. Okay. So it's really for yourself that you would apply earlier. You would wait until the LSAT is in for the initial review. Is that correct?
Yeah, Maysa, can I, because there was a question that came in through the chat, so I just want to make sure that this is really clear. So the first thing I'm going to say is it is going to differ between schools, whether they will complete an application if you already have an LSAT on file, or whether they will hold it pending a new score. So if you're someone who has multiple LSAT scores, you definitely want to make sure to talk to the school about whether they will hold as incomplete until your final LSAT score comes in, whether they will automatically complete and review, or whether they will give you a choice, because that's going to be important. If you're taking the LSAT for the first time in January, there's no law school, I don't think, that's going to review your application until that score comes in. The question that came in about whether to submit prior to a deadline is, I think the answer is yes, most universally. It definitely is for USC. So we have an automatic fee waiver that is available through February 1st. So you can submit your application through February 1st, even if you're not taking the LSAT until February. Now, the February LSAT is going to be very late for us because our priority deadline is February 1st. But if you're taking the January test and you won't have your score until that first week of February, you can submit your application and we will hold it. It's an automatic hold. We will not complete a file even with every other element without that new score. So I hope that gives a little bit of context to that question.
Yes, thank you so much. Any other comments with respect to timing?
Yeah, this is Justin at Chapman. One thing I'll say too is, I mean, again, it is very school specific on when, the latest LSAT you can take and when you apply. I mean, every school has different application deadlines. I know at Chapman, ours is a little bit later, April 15th. So people can still take the February LSAT, and we'll even let students take the April LSAT as long as they have their application submitted before that date. So I say that just to make sure you guys know it's different by school. But I think what's important is looking at the school that has the earliest deadline and kind of working from that, right? Because you don't want to miss out on applying possibly to, USC or UCLA that have earlier deadlines, but also knowing that the door isn't completely shut and some schools do have later application deadlines. Just be mindful, that also the later you apply, because we all do rolling admission, that there may be less seats available and it'll be very competitive. So that's where it's better to apply early. When I tell students to apply to Chapman, I usually say the hot zone for us is basically November to February, but that hot zone could be different for each school depending on when their application deadline is. But just be mindful of that, definitely, do your research, but set your goal at the one that has the earliest deadline. That way you're in good shape regardless.
Thank you. One more question regarding the opportunity to provide an addendum, and this question is for Hamada, since you've worked directly with so many students. Would you always encourage a student to attach one? Are there cases where you would suggest they do not? And what are some instances where you would use this document to a student's benefit?
Perfect, yeah. I mean, again, for me, I'm proof in the pudding, because I think my addendum really helped clarify my LSAT score. not making excuses, but providing a series of explanations and leaving it to the admissions committee to render the decision accordingly. But an addendum really is not necessary if you've crushed the LSAT and you really did very well in undergrad and have a great GPA. And really there's nothing, and if there's something that you can include in one of the two main documents, a personal statement and the diversity statement, then I don't think an addendum would be required. What I mean by that latter comment is to say if there's something that was, let's say, a medical tribulation or something you really want to bring to the fray, but you felt it would crowd out or take away the attention from the hook you have in your personal statement or your diversity statement, then you can include that in the addendum to explain a certain thing that may have transpired for you. But do not use valuable real estate, like the personal statement or even the diversity statement, to explain poor grades or an LSAT or something like that. That's just, if you were to go back to the thing that you asked in the beginning, what are the no-nos and red flags for your statements? That would be one of the top things there, alongside of, I want to apply to law school because that would be my definitely no-go zone on that one. So that's what I use. What I would use the addendum for is GPA, LSAT. I would use it for, again, something medical, a gap in education. Sometimes a criminal record. You had a DUI, you had a misdemeanor, you had something, you want to explain it, you want to bring it to the fray, because like Maysa said, this is an opportunity for you to kind of, to bring certain things. I'm sorry, this is what the USC dean said, that you think that they're not going to know and they're just going to skip over. It's an elephant in the room. You want to address it. You want to nip it in the bud. You want to provide an explanation for it and leave it at that. Don't make a series of excuses on it. Those are the key things that you could use the addendum for. Keep it to about 300-400 words. Don't make it into a prolonged document because the schools don't require it. So they're not going to put a word count on it typically. So I wouldn't just use the space and just pile everything in there. Keep it to 300-400 words, describe the issue, describe what you learned from it, describe how other things can also help better speak to you as in terms of your aptitude and your own moral turpitude in terms of your character for that program.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful. I'm just now looking at the chat questions, and I want to thank our panelists so much. I see that you've been responding throughout the presentation to some of the chat questions. A couple of themes that I'm seeing, the idea that is more. Students are grappling, should I do a double major? Would that make me more competitive? Should I take on more extracurriculars? If someone could speak to the idea is more or is sometimes less more from your experience in looking at applications. Erin, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to start this conversation and get my perspective. I'm sure some of the other panelists will as well. So, I mean, ultimately, there's no magic bullet. There's no checklist that we have, right? What I strongly encourage candidates to remember is that your experience, your education, your resume, your life's work is yours alone. And law school is only 3 years of your life, and all of us have a lot more experience outside of that, right? So what you do leading up to law school is likely going to create opportunities for you post law school. So it's a similar advice I'd give to candidates who are thinking about taking time between college and law school. If there's anything else that you want to do, if there are any experiences that you want to have, I encourage you to have them. We're not looking for resumes of people who have been part of 15 clubs and presidents of 10 of them, and also held down a part-time job and was a double major and graduated in 3 years. Like, when did you sleep, right? Our whole class can't be made up of people like that. Those are like diamonds. Those are like, I don't know, the unicorns or whatever. But the reality is that whatever it is you do, whatever it is you share with us, we're going to be happy to see that. And we're going to make decisions based on only what you present to us. If you choose to spread yourself too thin, it's probably going to impact other aspects of your life, whether personally, professionally, mentally, right, your health. But ultimately, it's important that you are focused on your academics, that you're ensuring that you're getting the breadth of education and experience that you're hoping to get that are going to create a strength of your skill set. That resume that you're developing is the same resume with tweaks, of course, that you're going to submit to law firms and agencies and government offices and judges to get jobs. And so you do want to make sure that you're taking the time to invest in some of those experiences, because when you walk into an interview and they say, oh, well, what was your time like doing this? Or how did you manage, to accomplish this? You want to have context for that. You want to have real sustainable experience that you can talk about. So it's not about checking a ton of boxes. It's about having quality of information to sort of to jump off the page.
Thank you, Erin. And I would agree with that just based off my experiences as well. A couple interesting questions have come in that I think will be relevant to some of our applicants. Let's talk a little bit about joint JD MBA programs or other joint programs, joint MPH programs and such. Does that make your acceptance less likely, neutral, or more likely if you're applying to a joint degree program? Danae, if you could speak on that, I think that would be helpful. I know UCLA offers a bunch of joint programs.
Yeah, so this is really going to depend on the school. So I think each school is probably going to have to clarify. At least at UCLA, admissions are completely separate. The joint aspect of the joint degree programs happens after you've already been admitted to both schools. So you have to get into the JD program and you have to get into the MBA program or the MPH program, or whichever one of the joint programs that you are applying to. We don't give special consideration to students just because they're applying to do a joint degree at the school. However, certainly I think the joint degree students can have a very high degree of sort of seriousness of academic purpose. Simply because they want to do a joint degree, they tend to have a really good idea of why they're pursuing that joint degree and how it's going to help them achieve the things in the legal profession that they want to achieve. And that can certainly be something that can absolutely help an application.
Thank you. And if they get into the law program but not the MBA program, they still get into the law program. Is that correct?
That is correct. You can be admitted to one and not the other. And that's why I think it's actually really important that if you know 100% that you want to do a joint degree program, that you research the schools that you're applying to make sure that you're applying to enough joint degree programs that you will have a good chance of being admitted to both the JD and the joint degree program that you are applying to. So if you only apply to the JD MBA program at UCLA, you could have the chance of not being admitted to one or the other, and that would be very disappointing for you. So just make sure you're applying to multiple programs if you're 100% certain about pursuing it. And if you're not sure, like if you're interested in pursuing a joint degree in the future, but you're not 100% sure, that's okay. At least at UCLA, you do have the opportunity to apply for a joint degree program during that first year of law school.
Thank you. Very helpful. Are there any other schools that currently treat it differently, or seems to be difficult? Another question we have is regarding the pandemic. How have applications changed this cycle? Are schools giving a bit more leniency in terms of GPA and LSAT considering the pandemic? Is it something that if a student has directly been impacted, is it something that they would include in their documents? Have you seen any differences in applications this year?
I'm happy to start off on that one. I mean, I think,
you.
What I'll say is that, I mean, as far as giving leniency for LSAT and GPA, that's not the case. I mean, if anything, we're saying it's more competitive. So I think, unfortunately, I mean, I think it's going to be very important to build as strong a case as possible to get admitted, right? I mean, I think that there are some things that folks have done, like, for example, for the LSAT, right? The Law School Admission Council, LSAC, that puts on the LSAT. They've created the LSAT Flex that can be taken remotely, right, to kind of help students so, they can take it. There's more of them being offered. They're providing resources, right? They're actually, for students who maybe don't have access to, a computer or a laptop, they're actually providing, tablets and computers for students to be able to take the LSAT Flex. They're also, if like, let's say someone lives, in a place where they don't have a quiet space because they live with other people or they're just not quiet in that area, they're actually providing reimbursements for hotel rooms. So I think, that's the Law School Admission Council is providing those things to really help people, be able to do that. I think as it relates to, we get this question a lot about pass-fail grades, like from the spring semester, as law schools, we're not looking at that negatively. We understand most of our law schools went to pass-fail for the spring grades, right? Now, obviously, if that changed for this fall and there are grades in place, again, it's going to be important to really do the best that you can and get the strongest grades, because we are going to consider any grades that you get. But for the spring semester, when schools, started going remote and many schools went to pass fail, we're not going to look that in any way negatively upon the candidate. The one thing I will say about the pandemic, and I think that's, important is, I think what it's going to make more difficult for students to do is to really engage with the schools, right? Because you can't just go walk on campus. You can't just get a feel for the school like you normally used to. But schools are doing a whole lot. I know my colleagues on this call and myself, we're doing a whole lot to still give students opportunities to engage with our communities through virtual events that we're doing. I know many of us have started office hours, so you can jump in and literally click on a link and see one of our faces and talk to us. We're putting more information available online, like virtual tours. I know, we're starting a program where we're actually going to do live tours, where someone, from the admissions office will actually be in the building walking students around and explaining the different components so they can actually still see it kind of in real time. So there's a lot of different unique ways to do it. Even though our campuses may not be open, I still think there's a lot of great information that's out there. We also strongly encourage you to reach out to us to connect with current students, to connect with faculty. I think that's a great way to really learn more about the school, look, the environment there, the feel, right? If you talk to students, as you've heard mentioned on the panel, that's a way to get to know the school. You can talk to faculty, you can talk obviously to the admissions office, but sometimes it's helpful to talk to other people, even alumni we can put you in contact with. So I think there's definitely, you have to be creative and thoughtful and really, still do your due diligence, even if it's remote, in deciding which law school is the right fit for you. The last thing I'll say is I know there was a part of the question was kind of, is that something like is the pandemic something you should necessarily focus on in your personal statement? I would be careful there. I mean, I just think, everyone is experiencing the pandemic, right? It's affecting a lot of people. Now, there are folks probably that out there that it may have affected in a different way, in a very significant way, and I get that. And I think, if it's something that's very specific and really something huge, I think it would be okay, but I would, again, steer away from that. I think what's more important is for you to talk about yourself, for you to really focus on telling your story, telling us about, the person that you are, it's your narrative, it's your opportunity to shine through, and I think, there were some great pieces of advice for the personal statement that were given in the chat. Utilize those, pieces and really try to think about a way to tell your story, and not to focus on necessarily something, that's currently happening, but really focusing on you and who you are. And at the end of the day, it's a different time. I get it. I love, meeting with students in person and shaking their hands and getting to know them personally, in person, but it's different now. But I actually found that, it's actually to some extent easier to connect with people from further distances. So I'm able to connect with people on the East Coast, in the Midwest through Zoom, where in the past it may have just been an email. Now I can actually talk to them, see them, share a conversation, share a laugh, so there's just still ways to connect in a way that can be really impactful in you making a decision on where to go to law school. So definitely my last piece of advice is just do your due diligence, utilize the resources that are out there for you to connect with the schools virtually.
Thank you. Another question leading up regarding scholarships and financial aid. What about this applicant who really wants to apply to law school, wants to apply to 10 different law schools, simply does not have the money to apply? What resources are offered at your institutions, and also what scholarships do you offer students? I know many do receive merit-based scholarships. Are there any other options for students? Is it something that they initiate, or is it something that the law school initiates with the application? Where does a student get started on applying to law school if they are facing financial difficulties, and also how to fund their law school education? Dean Garcia, could you speak to that?
Sure. I think a few of my colleagues have alluded to the fee waiver aspect of applying. Some of us don't have a fee. So, USD does not charge an application fee. And I think most law schools are very generous in the way they give out fee waivers, application fee waivers. Now, the LSAC has their set of cost, and unfortunately we're not able to waive those. Those need to be addressed with the LSAC, but they also have a program in place where they will consider fee waivers that will include the exam and like 2 or 3 CAS reports as part of the package that they're for the fees that they're waiving. So I would encourage anybody who has that financial need to go to the lsac.org website and look into requesting some of those fees. So that covers the application portion of it. The actual the education piece, the tuition, I think that all of us are very competitive in the way we award scholarships. Now, you know, for better or worse, this is a merit-based process. People with the highest LSATs and the highest GPAs in general tend to get the most money. But there are some programs where need is factored into it. For example, the UCs are required to use a portion of their aid as need-based aid. There are other private schools that have specifically they have specifically set aside money for need-based scholarships. So this is it is somewhat tedious, but it requires a lot of research. You know, it's a matter of going through the websites, looking at what is available. Every law school is required to put out a report called the 509 report that will tell you, a section of it is on scholarships. It'll tell you the median scholarships. It'll tell you how many of them are renewable, and of those, how many were not renewed, because many of them have conditions attached to them. So not every scholarship is the same. You know, it's important that you pay attention to the fine writing on the bottom of those letters and make sure that you understand what you're getting into. You know, the nature of graduate education, the funding is student loans. The federal government steps back and says there's no more Pell Grants, no more SEOG grants. The state says there's no more Cal Grants. It's on the individual. And, you know, on average in California, a student will graduate with about $150,000 in debt. That is the nature of a legal education. But I think that, you know, by considering a number of law schools, you know, some that are the reach schools, the ones that you're very competitive, and then the safety schools will give you a broad range of financial options. You know, that maybe it's just not possible to be able to fund your dream school. You know, you don't want to graduate with $400,000 in debt. And if that's the case, then, you know, maybe something that where the financial piece becomes the driver in your decision making. You know, you should have a broad range of options by the time you step back, so you can, you know, weigh everything from financials to the, you know, the quality of the education, let's call it that, and then the location and experience, and that way you can make a, you know, well-informed decision.
Let me quickly add something just to that from my own experience, having graduated law school again a while back, but I was very fortunate. Berkeley at the time, Dean Tom would remember this. I think when Maysa and I were there, it was what, like $18,000 a year. Went up to, I think, about 24 by the time I graduated. Now it's near 48. But one of the things I did is I really tried to think out of the box, is I didn't get funding for my education. And so and I don't know if this was, I think it was allowed, but I taught classes in the undergrad campus because Berkeley's located right there. And they were looking for law students to teach courses as TAs and GSIs and so forth. And so I did that for pretty much all 3 years, balancing that with my academics. I also did law firm jobs every single summer. I was fortunate to get a law firm job my 1L year as well as my 2L year. And so I was able to save and just keep paying back my loans so that I graduated debt-free after 3 years. The other thing that you want to consider also, and maybe some of the deans can speak about this, is the LRAP program, which will allow you to have advantages in terms of if you're going to be working for a nonprofit or government. I think it's something to that effect where they will forgive your loans after a certain while, or, I mean, there's probably more clarity that needs to be involved in that, because I wasn't a beneficiary of it, but it is an opportunity for folks that are not going to go directly into a law firm, but going to go work for the government or state government or federal government to that, something to that effect. So maybe one of the deans can speak about that as well.
The point is I think that it's important to check with the individual schools where you're applying, because there are so many different kinds of opportunities according to the schools. Berkeley, for example, that has a special program for first generation students and an application specific for them, and an associated scholarships that cover everything for all 3 years. And then there are various other merit-based and need-based scholarships, but it's really contingent on the schools, and applicants should investigate carefully all of the financial aid opportunities by school.
Thank you.
To add to Amara's, I also want to make note of, in addition to LRAP programs, the federal government, as of right now, still has in existence the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, whereby if you are working at a nonprofit or government job and you make, you put yourself on a income-based repayment plan and you make 120 qualified payments, after 10 years, any remaining balance can be written off. It is a taxable incident, meaning that you pay taxes on that benefit, but that would be a great way to unload a bundle of the debt for those who are pursuing public service work.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Another question regarding transferring within law schools. What percentage of your students transfer in after their first year of law school? Do you advise kind of banking on that, or would you suggest they commit to the law school that they accept?
You know, I really think it's going to be different for every student. I think that there are some students who get into a law school that is maybe not their dream school, and they get there and they think, you know what, I'm just going to do really well and I'm going to apply to transfer. But then they have a really great experience, you know, and so they just have to think about what is best for them. And it's certainly okay to apply to transfer. Students do it every single year. We have a population of anywhere from 35 to 45 transfer students at UCLA. And it's kind of nice because when you are applying as a transfer student, things like your LSAT scores, your GRE scores are not going to be weighed as heavily. So I do think that it is an opportunity for students who maybe, you know, weren't serious contenders for some of their top picks the first time around to go to another law school, do really well, develop good relationships with those law professors, and then have the opportunity to transfer. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that at some law schools, and UCLA is one of those law schools, merit scholarships and need-based scholarships may not be available to transfer students. And, you know, if you're going to a school that is, you know, lower ranked, you might have gotten a really great scholarship. So you might be in a position where you are having to give up a big scholarship that you got. So it's really important just to think through all of the different options and make the best decision for you and for your career path.
That's a very good point. We are getting to the end of our time here, so I definitely want to let the panelists go very soon because I know that this is a very busy season for them. But I just want to thank you all again. If the attendees have any other questions, as well as any preliminary questions, as I mentioned at the beginning, such as, is law school right for me? What is it like? Please feel free to reach out directly to me. All the panelists here have been so gracious with their time. I also know them personally, so if you have a question that you would like to direct specifically to them, but for whatever reason you want to remain anonymous, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And I'll be sure to get that question over to them and see if they can provide answers. Also, if you're currently working on your actual documents and you want me to take a quick glance, or if you just have some questions about your documents, please also don't hesitate to contact me directly. Thank you all so much again for your time, and be sure to look ahead in your emails for our next programs. We're going to be having programs all throughout the year with the initiative. Thank you so much. Bye.